last thing I want to talk about for this particular lecture is the central nervous system and how it affects the autonomic nervous system. Unfortunately, in this class, I don't spend much time on the central nervous system. I wish that I had the ability to spend more time, but our time is limited, and so I only briefly introduce the central nervous system as I talk about the peripheral nervous system. If we look at the nervous system, the central nervous system, we have our frontal lobe, our forebrain here, responsible primarily for personality's executive function and other higher cognitive skills. We have in the center here, and I've colored it in green, but this area here is a complicated circuit of neurons that we call the limbic system. And that limbic system does indeed send fibers out towards the frontal lobe. We also get communication back to it from the frontal lobe. And what this limbic system does is it's responsible for basic primal behavioral states, not the complicated behavioral states or emotional states that we sometimes experience, but the more primal kind, the lust and fear, responses that you would find, emotional responses that you would find in other life forms, your cat, your dog, a reptile, what have you, would have these limbic system responses. And the emotional states that we experience in the limbic system can influence the frontal lobe, where we get some more complicated and nuanced emotional responses, and vice versa. Then we have the cerebellum, and we can experience emotions in the cerebellum as well. In fact, any of you that are dancers are aware that you can express emotion, you can feel emotion, you can generate emotion through the act of movement. You also can have negative consequences through motion, such as motion sickness, nausea, and so forth. And again, we get some back and forth communication with the limbic system and the cerebellum, which controls movement. All of these essentially generate our emotions. And I'm oversimplifying, of course, because the processing of emotions is quite complex. Thoughts can generate emotions, environment can generate emotions, interactions with other humans can generate emotions, anyway, you get the basic idea. We have a lot of different complicated responses to our situation that will generate these emotions. I bring all of this up because each of these can affect the autonomic nervous system. Anybody who's had a panic attack caused by fear generated in the limbic system knows that you're going to have a racing heart, your respiratory system's going to be very fast, you might feel like you can't breathe, you might feel like you're going to faint, maybe you break into a cold sweat. These are strong emotional responses to the sensation of fear generated in the limbic system. You can also have strong feelings of embarrassment, usually generated by an experience that generates thoughts and can cause you to, say, blush. We can get emotional responses to the sight of blood. Some people faint at the sight of blood. Funny story, I do great with other people's blood, but had a mole removed and almost passed out on the table. Poor doctor was just cutting this simple thing off. Local anesthesia, no big deal, but there I am, white as a ghost, in a cold sweat, just about ready to pass out. So all of these activate the autonomic nervous system. Motion sickness causing nausea, that's a digestive system type of response due to the ANS, sweating, rapid heart rate, slow heart rate, etc. And so these types of things are important to understand, and remember that even though the autonomic nervous system is independent, and autonomic meaning autonomous, we do get influences from the central nervous system. The hypothalamus, which you'll recall, the hypothalamus is actually this little structure right here. Here's my pituitary. The hypothalamus, also important for regulating homeostasis, detecting body temperature, hunger, thirst, etc. And the responses that are often generated by the hypothalamus as it detects environmental cues are often mediated through the autonomic nervous system. For example, body temperature. We just talked about that, but if body temperature is too high, the hypothalamus will send a signal down the spinal cord to the preganglionic neurons in the sympathetic pathway so that we can get activation of those alpha-1 receptors to cause constriction if we're too cold or dilation if we're too hot. Likewise, the pons in the medulla here and here, if the medulla recognizes, for example, that, let's look at pulmonary, that we don't have, or let's say we have excessive amounts of carbon dioxide in our blood, that's going to stimulate the autonomic nervous system, which in turn will regulate the parasympathetic nervous system. Or the fibers from the parasympathetic nervous system will in turn regulate bronchodilation so that we can get rid of the carbon dioxide more. Same thing with the digestive system and so forth. So this form of communication is super important. Again, I'm simplifying for sake of time because we really don't have the opportunity in this class to go into much depth in terms of the central nervous system. And that's a wrap, guys. We're done with the autonomic nervous system.